Jiayun is a Shanghai-based strategist, cultural researcher, and editor working at the intersection of Chinese youth culture, internet trends, and cross-border storytelling. She leads social media and content strategy at Red-Eye Media, develops emerging culture and trend reports, and has contributed to platforms such as Sabukaru and Nero Editions.
Thank you guys so much for being here and for having me. And thank you, Jen and Daniel, for arranging this and inviting me to be part of the program. My name is JY, and I'm a Shanghai-based cultural researcher and specializing in Chinese internet culture and youth trends. My work revolves around tracking the constantly shifting landscape of Chinese internet culture, viral slang, memes, emerging subcultures, and how these online phenomena just ripple out into real world society. And I also focus on understanding how young people express themselves through digital vernacular, how trends evolve and spread, and how this behavior tells us about contemporary Chinese youth identity. Beside that, I also translate these cultural moments for cross-border audiences, bridging the gap between Chinese internet culture and international understanding. So today, I kind of want to just talk about how Chinese youth are thinking about health and optimization right now, and why it looks very different, or I would say quite different from what we usually imagine when we hear the word optimization. So I've been thinking a lot about this moment. We are currently in where optimization culture has kind of become completely unavoidable. Everyone is kind of tracking something, whether you are wearing your Apple Watch, tracking your sleep scores, your step counts, macros, and screen time. I think the body also has become another dashboard, another kind of interface to be monitored, improved, upgraded, checked all the time. And there's also this assumption baked into all of it that optimization means the same thing everywhere. So more data, let me go to the more data, more discipline. You can see like trends of people like tracking their Strava, wearing Aura Ring, like Daniel mentioned previously. I think if you're tired, you also optimize your sleep. If you're stressed, you optimize your routine. Peak performance kind of function as the default goal. But because I spend a lot of time on Chinese social media, especially on platforms like Douyin, Xiaohongshu, Kuaishou, or WeChat, I think especially platforms like this, I think I kept running into posts that doesn't really fit the logic of how we define wellness and optimization right now. There was one post that really stuck with me from years ago. I think someone posted on Xiaohongshu like around 2 a.m. and then was holding like a bubble tea with like collagen powder mixed in the bubble tea, and then a kind of a sheet mask glowing under their phone screen. And then like another post showing like AI app analyzing their tongue and telling them they had excess dampness. And the caption just said something like 朋克养生的第三天. So the translation would be like punk health day 3, or like it's third day while doing punk health. So I kind of thought it was making fun of like self-care culture or like wellness, but the more I saw this post, I think the more I realized this was basically Chinese young people just trying to take care of themselves without like pretending their lives were actually healthy, and approach wellness in a more ironic way. Next page. I think compare that to what's really dominating Western optimization culture right now, including what we just saw, terms like looks maxing, locked in, peptides from China, cold plunges at 5 a.m., Ozempic, Brian Johnson protocols. Chinese youth are dealing with many of the same pressure, and in some cases, it's actually more intense sometimes. Many of you might heard of the term 996, which means that like you're working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. for 6 days a week. And then you see young people on the internet calling themselves like Niuma, which means cow horse, basically saying they are just labor, they are like the livestock for the company. And then you add on like, platform precarity, future uncertainty. It's so hard to find job right now. and then this constant sense that your body is also giving out early. I think there's also another time people joke about themselves called 脆皮年轻人, which direct translate to brittle young people. It's a condition like where your body is so crispy, it can like crack or break down at any moment. But then what's so interesting is then the response of how to approach wellness or optimization is kind of not escalation, it's something else. And I think that difference reveals something really crucial about what optimization actually is and who it serves and what happens when a goal shifts from enhancement to simply just survival. So today I kind of want to map out two models of optimization and the structural condition that produce them, where one model is really about transcending limits and the other one is about how you work around them. So I will zoom out for a second right now and talk about what's happening outside of China. I think many of you guys were familiar with this. I think what started as self-care has actually become like a second job. This TikTok influencer called Devin Kelly, who kind of popularized those elaborate morning routines, kind of called morning shed. Morning shed is like an extreme beauty setup where you apply tons of like skincare products, patches, hair tool, and in some cases mouth tape before you go to bed, and then to achieve kind of like a flawless, refreshed look upon waking. Although she kind of defended it by saying self-care is my favorite hobby, which made it very hard to argue with that framing because who is really against self-care, right? But then looking at hobbies, I think hobby used to mean like, idle time. These rituals eliminate kind of like idle time completely. I think night mass is working while you sleep, supplements time to the minutes, bodies continuously edited, even offline. The question really shifts from care to performance. Who's the ritual actually for when it's documented, quantified, and broadcast? Then we also move on to you get the convergence of wellness is with like manosphere logic. Here's an example of Joe Rogan. It's the same self-improvement impulse, but rebranded with a harder, a more aggressive vocabulary, less like Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop self-care, but more discipline, more power, more dominance. It's adjacent to kind of like what we say looks maxing forums, like incel aesthetic, and the idea that bodily optimization is kind of a shortcut to like a status. So everything kind of becomes like quantified, like including sleep scores, your gut health dashboards, your calorie logs, your biometric rings. We kind of also score like books on like, Goodreads, films on like Letterboxd, music. We cannot wait for like Spotify Unwrap, steps, rest. Then the body just kind of become another interface. And then the logic kind of scales like, GLP-1, Ozempic, diverted from like medical necessity to cosmetic demand, and enhancement kind of becomes very scarce, expensive, status coded. Body started function as like luxury goods. So then now I want to talk about how Chinese youth approach this. So they are living through like a parallel set of pressures, but they kind of arrive at a very different strategy. When you actually spend enough time on Chinese social media, you keep seeing, especially particularly in health and wellness section on Xiaohongshu or Douyin, you actually see this term quite often, and it's called 朋克养生, translated to punk healthcare, where like 朋克 means punk, the attitude, the approach, and 养生 means like health, cultivation, or wellness. But when you put them together, you get this like contradiction that's actually the whole point. The simplest explanation is like most young people already in China already know that like what being healthy is supposed to look like. It means that you sleep early, you exercise, you go to the gym, you eat properly, don't overwork, you don't doom scroll at night. And none of this is like actually new information. But the issue here is that actually a lot of people cannot consistently keep up with this lifestyle. And then even if they want to, I think like, for example, your work always runs late. And then that means that your social life also starts late. If you finish at 7, that means you only meet your friend at 9. Messages don't really stop. Your boss texts you all the time. There's always something you should be doing. And over time, being tired actually stops feeling temporary and just becomes the baseline. Yeah, you're just, some videos showing like Neoma lifestyle. There's also this like line that describes this trend succinctly. I keep seeing it in a very ironic way, like how people describe punk healthcare as it says like 一边做事一边养生, which means that you're just doing things that slowly kills you, but at the same time you are trying to offset that damage with little health rituals. Which I think it's not a perfect lifestyle. It's basically people trying to stop things from getting completely out of hand. And then kids stay up late, but then they do something really small after by, for example, when you go to a club until 3 a.m., but how you balance it out is that you add goji berries in your water. You have like hawthorns for like, indigestion, a food soak before the bed during winter time. They eat food which is not great for them, like, junk food, but then they always pair it with something that's supposed to like cancel it out or balance it out. Kids also dress for like aesthetic and not comfort, but then they also add a layer of heat tech underneath. What's so interesting is a lot of these practices are actually pulled from like traditional Chinese medicine, which is something that like, when we were a child, we always think like, this is something that our grandfathers practice, like food soaks, herbal patches, constitution-based food habits, seasonal adjustment, things you can just plug into. But these are the things that you can just plug into daily life without really needing elite resources. While looks maxing and peak performance optimization are built on the fantasy that if you discipline your body hard enough, you can actually win. You can get attractive enough, productive, and optimized enough, and you can transcend that precarity through exceptional performance. However, I think punk healthcare starts from a very different premise. Exceptional performance isn't really guaranteed in this sense. I think transcendence isn't also really the whole point. The point is really just about maintenance, stabilization, getting through the week with your body still intact. So if Western optimization pushes care towards performance and eventually into status ritual, right? Like, and then I think then Chinese punk health moves into a very opposite direction. Which also raises the obvious question of like, why TCM or like traditional Chinese medicine specifically, why does this become the toolkit for like maintenance-based care? You guys probably also seen like a lot of like influencer on Instagram talking about Chinese medicine, talking about cordyceps specifically. I think it's also because like traditional Chinese medicine provides this framework because it's built on balance and compensation, rather than like intervention and enhancement. Western medicine tends towards like crisis response, right? So like when something breaks, you fix it. But for Chinese use specifically navigating like, chronic low-level breakdown rather than acute crisis, I think maintenance makes more sense than like enhancement. Also, crucially, I think TCM-based maintenance is accessible in ways like Western optimization isn't. Because like, how like Brian Johnson's protocol actually costs $1 million. Ozempic is really expensive. Sometimes, even it's unavailable. Certain like wellness products signals luxury. But in this case, I think like small gestures like goji berries, like hawthorns, patches, herbal teas, these are just everyday items that you can integrate into your existing consumption. I'd also like to discuss about how TCM is being folded into, or like punk health is being folded into everyday life in ways that fit how young people already live, work, and then scroll on like social media. And I'm gonna go through some example of hot activities that kids in China are doing this day. One entry point is how we look at time differently. Apps like this app called Shili pushes notification for solar terms. So like calendars like Li Dong, which is winter solstice, and then you have summer solstice, 夏至, and you attach like a simple advice towards that date. So like on this day you avoid drinking cold waters. On that day you eat warming food, and then on this day you protect your sleep, and then you pay attention to certain symptoms. In a life that really feels like flat and continuous, I think seasonal rhythm becomes like a low effort way to reintroduce cycles and variations. There's also this, I think it looks really intense, but it's actually fine. This thing called moxibustion is a traditional Chinese medicine therapy, which consists of like burning dried mugworts on particular points on your body. People are really raving about it, especially during the summertime. It kind of stimulates your circulation through the points and inducing a smoother flow for the blood and qi. This is, just another example that looks really extreme from the outside, but makes sense once you understand the logic. On Xiaohoshu, this trend actually went viral. The last time when I went to the hospital, tried to book out a session, it was completely booked out month in advance. Young people actually also share like DIY guides because they also come in the patch form. So like you can put the patch on your back, and then where you place it, how you place it, recovery tips, some even like organize informal group session, and then helping each other apply patches correctly. And then we move towards a more commercialized kind of expat Chinese beverage brand like Genki Forest. Also, they have released herbal tea lines where you see like they put in the whole ginseng in the bottle specifically for kids that go out to clubs until 3 a.m. And then chains like Haiti have kind of collaborated with this Chinese TCM pharmacy called Tongren that has like over 300 years of history to create like a wellness milk tea. These are like marketed around concepts like, how you reduce your dampness, your qi, your blood circulation. And also, interestingly enough, is over time, this language has kind of become like a casual vocabulary. When young people talk or having conversation about like, about like how you have excess dampness is so casual. It's like the same way how Western audience talk about like, being dehydrated or being like burnout. Also in cities like Guangzhou and Chengdu, actually all major city, TCM night markets have actually become really popular as well, especially among younger crowds. I think people go there to browse herbs, getting their pulses read, getting massage, to buy pre-mixed TCM formula, or just chat. And then finally, there's also the digital layer. Apps like Ali Jiankang allows user to like, upload town photos, answer lifestyle question, or even attempt pulse readings through phone sensors. There's this example that I really like. It's basically installed in this, can you guys see my cursor? So basically it's a machine it's a tablet that's attached to a urinary in public toilets for males specifically. So when you pee into the urinary, they kind of like test out and analyze your pees, and then tells you how healthy you are. So I think optimization is always towards something like serving some goals, but then the question really becomes like, whose optimization, like peak performance benefiting whom? When you step back, what's clear is that these are optimizing for like fundamentally very different things. I think Western optimization is aiming for like immortality, don't die, productivity, competitive advantage, aesthetic perfection. It's also kind of like optimization for capital accumulation, for winning under capitalism, for transcending the condition breaking you by becoming exceptional enough to escape. It doesn't work because the condition keep extracting from everyone, right? And then the tours are like really expensive enough that they just reinforce who's already winning. Whereas I think, oh, here's a slide I missed. Whereas I think punk healthcare is optimizing for sustainability, resilience, and basically collective survival. It kind of acknowledge the limits instead of like denying them, and accessible maintenance instead of like, exceptional enhancement. Of course, you cannot fix like the system like 996, you cannot fix like working culture or platform precarity, but you can definitely survive in a very different way. You can insist that your body actually have needs, rhythm, limits, even when the economic system pretends they don't. I also think like punk healthcare really spreads really well because it's really relatable, it's low stakes and doesn't require expertise. Like maybe sometimes it requires expertise, but doesn't requires a lot of money. Especially on platforms like Xiaohongshu, like a lot of people talks about how like, you know, maybe it's the factor of like, you know, algorithm is pushing that trend, but like algorithm is not, didn't really invent the exhaustion, you know. But they also kind of help like circulate the language people use to talk about it, that circulation that reinforces that behavior. Um, so basically, I think maybe what optimization should actually be about staying human, despite everything trying to turn you into a machine. Strategic endurance, not peak performance, not being destroyed, not winning. It's more like, you know, tending a garden than upgrading the machine. I also want to talk about, I don't think the takeaway is everybody should practice punk health. It's more like being more careful with how we actually approach or talk about optimization when we design systems, tools, or narratives around health. It's worth asking whether they assume people having control when they actually don't. Like, I think punk health is useful only because it reveals the gap between ideal models and like reality, you know. So yeah. And then here's another slide. Sorry that I forgot to. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much for that. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes.
I don't know, do we have a mic? No, okay, it's fine.
I can speak loud.
Yeah.
So one of the big health trends in the last even 6 months in America, and particularly in San Francisco, has been, can you hear me?
Can you hear, okay?
Two.
Oh. Actually, I cannot.
Oh, no.
Maybe
Hello.
you can just relay the message and the question again. Yeah. There's like an echo going on, I think.
Yeah. Shall I just say really loud?
Oh, actually, maybe.
That'll feedback.
Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, yeah.
One of the big health trends in America and San Francisco in particular over the last 6 months has been the rise in use of peptides. Almost all the peptides that we're using come from suppliers in China because they're cheaper to manufacture in China, and there are sort of grey area in the US. Is this also a thing in China, or is this like an export-only sort of aspect of Chinese health, wellness culture?
Did you
Sorry,
get
what
that?
was the? Yeah, I heard peptides and 80% coming from China, and then I didn't really get the question at the end.
Is this also a thing in Chinese healthcare, or like Chinese?
Actually, no, because I do not like. So, for example, I spend a lot of time on Chinese internet, and then I basically like chronically online. The problem here is that I keep hearing the term peptides over and over again. And then just today, I went to Google peptides to Chinese translation because I actually don't know what's peptides in Chinese at all. And then I also don't really see the term peptides or like peptides in Chinese that often too. I think, unfortunately, I also am not very sure what does peptide actually do because I was really into the concept of like creatine previously, and I kept thinking they are the same thing. Or are they the same thing? I don't think they are the same thing, right, guys?
They're different.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Peptides just like a generic class of chemicals that have a certain basic structure, and some of them are like Ozempic, and some of them make your skin tan, and some of them can improve your eyesight, and some of them can make a massive class of different experimental chemicals. Some of them improve brain function. Like, it's just like antibiotics. It's a generic class of chemicals.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I don't think I've heard a lot of people actually having discussion about peptides, especially among like, at least like from my friends. I think the only like source that I hear peptides from are like, Instagram memes that talking about peptides are from China. And that's all.
Any other questions?
Can I ask?
Yeah.
This is like a selfish question. I just want to know where that urinal is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Where was the urinal that you mentioned? Where is it kind of
It's
located?
in. I think it's random. You can find it in different cities, like for example, Beijing or Shanghai. I've never seen one because I've never stepped into the male toilets to just check out those. But then I've also seen like different kind of videos and photos on Xiaohongshu specifically showing that this exists. Yeah.
I guess just off the back of that, is that, I mean, I guess like that way of sort of monitoring people's bodies in whatever way, I mean, do you, from your understanding, is that something that is predominantly in the kind of highly developed cities, or is that, do you get a sense that that's something sort of quite universal in mainland China? Does that make sense? I mean, is it quite a kind of, like big mega city kind of phenomenon, or?
It is definitely a big megacity phenomenon because I think it, like for example, like if you're talking about like first tier and second tier, like Shanghai, Guangzhou, or even some cities in Fujian, yes, I think they do exist, but like third tier city, I don't think they actually exist in those areas yet, especially for stuff that having like tech that's incorporated into this kind of like, you know, like medical consultation and stuff like that. But again, I think like, for example, like in this TCM night markets, like where like you have like a machine that that has AI reading your tongue, not reading your pulses is pretty common. And then these night markets are like easily accessible in different cities besides just like Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou. So.
I guess, can I ask a question about, I guess, the kind of contrast from what you were presenting kind of in China and compared to sort of, I guess, like the Western understanding and sort of practices in relation to, I guess, like optimization. I was thinking, I mean, certainly in its kind of, in the West, the sort of the clavicular kind of strand or sort of development, if you want to call it that, has a very sort of nihilistic quality to it or dimension to it, and it's kind of difficult to kind of understand where it's going in a sense. But from your presentation, it seemed like that people's kind of practices was not necessarily nihilistic, but it was kind of something else. But it did seem to kind of touch on a kind of a reckoning or kind of response to a kind of a world that maybe is not a kind of space for kind of human flourishing, shall we say? You know, like where, say, like with the clavicular kind of like context, it seemed like, yeah, there's a very sort of explicit kind of nihilistic quality to it, but you were kind of pointing at something else. And I was just wondering if you could kind of like, yeah, maybe like kind of expand on that, or.
I think in terms of that question, what I think that's, I'm not trying to say that the Western like optimization is bad or like good, but then like also to me, it feels very much like a thing that's only accessible for a group of people that could be very privileged in a way. Like, for example, like I think if you're talking about locked in, especially like you see those kind of like daily routine blogs or videos showing that like, oh, you wake up at 3 a.m., go to gym at 4 a.m. But then like the logic here is that if you go to gym at 4 a.m., that means you own like a private gym or like a gym that you can access at like for 24 hours. But then, like also like products like let me GLP-1 or let me like, you know, de-bloated, those kind of products are like, they represent that kind of like status symbol. For me, like I think punk health, it's kind of like interesting in the way that like it's easily accessible. Like if it's as simple as just adding like certain kind of like TCM ingredients in your water to make yourself feel better, then you could also do it without being way too rich, like for the lack of better term. Does it make sense? Yeah. So I think it's not trying to compare whether this is bad or this is good. What I think is interesting is that maybe it's a model that we can also learn from, like for audiences that's not based in China, for audiences that based outside of China. Like for example, like I've seen like videos just this week on TikTok about like people specifically flying to China to go to see the TCM hospitals, or like this thing called medical tourism. I'm trying to also find out if it's like, you know, a big group of people are doing that, or it's really just like that 4 videos that are existing on TikTok, or like China reporting it because it's, you know, like I wouldn't call it propaganda, or like promoting the medical structure or like infrastructure in China. But like I do also feel like there's something that it's also good that we can take away from this, how young people approach wellness or like optimization.
We have a question from the stream. Is that okay? It's a question from Bestie Flora, but she asks, what vision of the future do these 2 modes of healthcare project? So between punk healthcare and non-punk healthcare, because it's an assumption that wanting immortality requires a strong belief in the future. Yeah, what do you think are the kind of like visions of the future, I guess, for punk healthcare?
I think it's a really good question. I might need some time to really think about it. I think also because like punk healthcare actually happens around like 4 years ago, or like at least 3-4 years ago. I think maybe instead of like looking at the future, we might already live in the future of like what's the future for punk health right now. With what I understand right now is that people are practicing like more like qigong, like 八段锦, this thing called in China, and then they kind of incorporating 八段锦 into something that like, oh, you can go to a rave and then you can also practice that at the same time. Sorry, I'm just thinking.
Another comment that was made online that was quite interesting in response to Richard's question is also around how perhaps the Chinese don't use peptides that they export to the West. And so there's also that kind of like difference in kind of popular usage within the country.
Or maybe it's just like, it's because of like regulation. I mean, to try to figure it out more as well. And maybe it's just because it's regulation. Maybe it's like, it takes time for people to understand this is something that they need to get on, because like, for example, like Ozempic is also like in China right now, but like it's in a Chinese name, in a Chinese clinic. And I saw like Spanages are showing that like it's all constantly sold out. Like people are definitely doing that as well. But like, you don't see a group of people being, like, obviously they don't talk about it, and then you don't see a big group of people just, you know, sharing that information online too, so.
I have another question, sorry. China has the world's highest rate of smoking, and like a very large disparity, gender disparity in the number of people who drink. Men drink much more than women do. And I'm wondering if you could talk to kind of the gendered aspects of like becoming healthy, or like health trends. Like, to what extent is this sort of a feminized trend, or sort of, and do young Chinese men also smoke and also do punk healthcare? Like, is that a kind of a, you know, what are the kind of tensions here with things that are sort of manifestly bad for you?
I do not really have the number to show you that, like, if it's like a specifically trends for female or male, but one observation that I made is that the major supermarket I usually go to, they have like beer in like hawthorn and dates flavor that like a lot of men are buying. So I think like they are also kind of practicing, but yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask about, I guess, I was thinking about, I guess, the impact, I guess, like punk health has on, I guess, how people understand or sort of present their sort of bodies, I guess, and sort of like, because from what you were talking about, it seemed very, one of the takeaways that I got from it was this kind of, I guess, kind of an understanding of, I guess almost like survival, or just kind of being able to kind of, like survive in these kind of conditions. And so I was kind of where I think, again, kind of in the West, that sort of notion of sort of like optimization has been framed within how to improve your body, but in a very kind of aesthetic kind of way. It's the kind of presentation of your body in a particular way. And the kind of actual sort of health aspects of it are kind of often kind of secondary in a lot of respects. I mean, and they're like doing research on clavicular again, like, you know, he sort of took steroids from the age of like 14. He says that he takes like meth in order to kind of maintain his kind of 8% body fat or whatever it is, you know, clearly understanding that this is not a kind of practices that are for the kind of, for the benefit of his health as such. It's a purely kind of aesthetic endeavor. So I was kind of wondering in terms of like within this kind of idea of like punk health, whether there is a kind of aesthetic quality or dimension to it, and how does that sort of present itself?
There is definitely a layer of aesthetic like purpose that plays into punk health as well. When you talk about, like, I keep mentioning this term about like having like 湿气重, means you have like this excess dampness in your body. And then usually when excess dampness in your body results in like, you know, looking bloated, and then a lot of people actually go to remove their dampness from their body, hoping that they can de-bloat or, you know, themselves. So there's also definitely like a kind of like, you know, like, oh, I'm trying to lose weight, I want to go to like, you know, acupuncture clinics to have those needles like, you know, putting on my body, so in hopes that it could like change that. But then I think most of the time it's also kind of really not about aesthetic. So for example, I think the last time I, like, from my personal experience, obviously, the last time when I sprained my back at the gym, which is very ironic, I basically went to a Chinese hospital, and then they put those stickers that has like really small hard stones on those stickers, and they put those stickers on my ear, and then so the stones or like those balls are constantly stimulating the acupuncture points on my ear that helps with my back, which I also find it very ridiculous, but then somehow it works. I have these long running jokes with like people saying that like, I don't think it works like, you know, on like non-Chinese body because, you know, because it's like Chinese body. So maybe it just works really well on me. So like, you know, sometimes it's really about like, oh, if like I have to go to a hospital to see my back getting sprained, then it will take like extremely long. It will take like, you know, like, depends on what kind of symptoms you have or what kind of like goals that you are trying to achieve. I think you also decide what kind of like methods you want to have, whether it's like TCM based like self-care, or like a TCM based like, you know, fixing your issues, or like, you know, you want to get like Western pills. But I think like for me, somehow it feels like I do trust like TCM a bit more, because it feels like a more slow process of like healing, instead of like, you know, like a very serious invasion of like doing some things to my body.
Does anyone have any? I guess the last question I have, which is a question I'll probably ask everyone or all the guests, is I guess, yeah, this question of kind of optimization often sort of misses out the bit which is sort of, what are we being optimized for? And so I was wondering, sort of, with your understanding of optimization, what do you think that thing is that we are being, kind of demanded to be kind of optimized for, I guess? And
I
is
think
that
it's
kind of
also
different?
that I was just having.
God, sorry.
Yeah. I was just having this conversation with my partner about like what we are actually optimizing for. I think everybody is scared of like, you know, death, because we were watching like, you know, Alex Honnold climbing Taipei 101, and then we had this conversation about like what we are optimizing for. Like at the end of the day, I think whether it's like punk health or like Western optimization, like beside the aesthetic purpose one, I think we are constantly trying to extend our ways that it's about longevity, you know, like, so I think like, for example, if I want to try to, you know, healthy, go to gym, obviously I'm trying to live longer in a way, but then I just chose not to opt for a more aggressive way where I have to, transfer blood from my daughter or my son to achieve that or something like that. So I think like for me, also we talk about a lot about like how like, a lot of this TCM based self-care, a lot of like this self-care actually has like Chinese philosophy embedded in this kind of like practices. I think like for Chinese people, it's always about like, like there's this term called like 欲速则不达, which means that like, or if you are trying to act fast, you actually don't really like reach to the destination slower or something like that. I think for me, like Chinese philosophy also is about like, being subtle, being like stealth in a way that like you approach things, even when it comes to like approaching wellness and optimization, which is very interesting because like, like looking at like, peptides or looking at like Ozempic, it's always about like bold and then being loud, being like showing your body and stuff like that. But to us, it's mostly about like, if I do it in a very much slower way, then I will also achieve my goal. And then maybe I trust that slower process even more. So.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.